You could go ahead and mute your mics, and then a little bit later here, we'll give you an opportunity to come and be a part of the discussion and ask some questions, and then you can unmute when that happens. So welcome to I think this is our fourth or fifth, maybe, MBC Zoom family check-in. And so we are taking some time once a week to just check in with our church family and get caught up with each other. What we've done the first 3 or 4 times is we wanted to get an update on just how people are doing. And so we gave you an opportunity just to talk and catch up with each other and give us an update on your family. We've taken the last few weeks to do that. That's been really good. What we wanted to do tonight and for the next couple of weeks as well is just be able to invite some of our guests that we're a part of in our TES network and be a part of this discussion. And so we're going to do that tonight, and we're privileged to have one of our TES campus pastors with us. We're very thrilled for his willingness to do that. So just on a side note, tomorrow the governor of Michigan apparently is going to issue an order that's, from what we've heard, extending this lockdown order and stay-at-home order for a little bit longer. We don't know how long it's going to be, so we'll find out tomorrow afternoon, but it looks like we're going to be doing something like this for the foreseeable future. So we'll keep updating you on what this is going to look like. But it's just great to connect with you all tonight. We're so thankful for our church family, and just so fun to see you all and actually connect somewhat face-to-face anyway. So what I want to do is I want to introduce our guest. Dr. Rick Holland is somewhere on the screen. You can scroll through there and find him. It is just a privilege and a joy to have him a part of our call tonight. And I just thought I'd introduce him real quick to you. Rick and I met, I was trying to figure this out today, Rick, back in 1997. And I don't know if you remember this, but you came up to Spokane, Washington in February, and you did a college camp for us. And if I remember correctly, Spencer DeBerg drove you from Spokane over
to Missoula.
To Missoula, Montana, in a snowstorm.
Yeah, I remember that. Oh, yeah, he almost wrecked and killed us. I remember that very well.
Yep. We were very thankful that you were actually able to make it over for that conference. I actually have this. I pulled this out of my files. This is the weekend note-taking guide from that event. I still have it from 23 years ago. Can you believe that?
Wow. That's
so
amazing.
Here's what I want to know, Rick. Do you remember what you preached on?
I have no idea. I barely remember what I preached on this last Sunday, so no.
You preached out of Philippians 1, 2, 3, did some messages, and that was just really instrumental for our college ministry. So
I have pictures of it still.
Yeah.
Little snapshots like the old days.
Wow.
No, not digital, but camera.
I remember those. Real film.
I know. Yeah, I got pictures somewhere. I'll have to find them.
So I got a privilege of meeting Rick back in February of 1997. Fast forward about a year and a half, and Julie and I together moved to seminary in Los Angeles, and asked Rick if there'd be any opportunity to serve with him down there at Grace Community Church, and he took us out, both of us, to the Black Angus. And
no longer there. You're right.
I remember it's gone, but took us out for his wonderful lunch, and we talked about some ministry opportunities, and he was very gracious to allow us to be a part of the college ministry there, and got plugged into Crossroads, and had the privilege of serving with Rick for all those years. 3 years, in fact, and he allowed me the privilege of leading the UCLA ministry. And so Julie and I would drive down to UCLA a couple times a week and just had a great time with our UCLA students. But that began, I think, just a real appreciation of me for Rick, and learning from him, and just being stretched in my understanding of how to preach and how to do ministry, and just a passion for investing in men and seeing them trained in the local church. So Rick really formed in me just a real key conviction about preaching and the priority of the local church. And I got to sit under Rick's ministry for 3 years and met with him, I think, once a week at least with our other staff, and just had a marvelous time with Rick. So Rick, you really imprinted upon me just a robust ecclesiology and love for the word. And so I'm very grateful for you.
Well, listen, let's just close in prayer and say it was a great time tonight. It can only go down from there. So,
Amen.
Todd, you are a jewel. You didn't, those are gracious words, but what he's not telling you is that UCLA was a significant ministry. The UCLA as a Bible study was bigger at the time Todd took it than the church at Mission Road, where I came to now. He pastored collegians and what we call our senior staff, so adults. He was ministering to from cradle to the grave ever since I knew him, and had a lasting impact. One of my favorite preachers. Todd is blessed with the gift of clarity, and I love men who are clear. Especially, I think, Todd, you're gifted and able to take complex theological constructs and make them understandable to a college freshman, even a junior higher. And that's a gift, and that's a compliment. So love hearing you preach, love watching you shepherd, love that you're a part of our TES family, and we get to see each other here and there.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think for us, that's been one of the greatest joys of being a part of TES is, we parted ways for a while and just didn't have a lot of interaction. And then the Lord allowed us to be a part of the TES network again to be a part of the TES network 3 years ago, and just got the privilege of working with Rick and just kind of rekindling that friendship and that ministry relationship. So Rick is one of our homiletics and preaching professors at the Expositor Seminary, and he's pouring into future pastors that way. He is a senior pastor, teaching pastor at Mission Road Bible Church in Kansas City, Kansas. And he is married to his lovely wife, Kim, and they have 3 sons, Luke, John, and Mark. And so
excellent.
I think I got those in the right order, didn't I?
You did perfectly.
Awesome. So Rick, maybe just as a way to start, and by the way, church, what I want to do is I just want to interact with Rick for a little while, and we just want to ask some questions and maybe just kind of walk through a few issues together. And then we would invite you here towards the end of our call, if you have any questions, any things that you want to ask Rick, we're going to give you an opportunity to do that as well. So Rick, do you want to just introduce your family to us? Tell us a little bit about your wife and 3 boys and what they're doing. That'd be great.
Yeah, Kim, are you over there? She might stick her head over here in a second. She's working on some other things. 1 wife, 3 boys, and 1 daughter-in-law. We were empty nesters last year, and now we have 2 of our boys back. Our oldest son is going to law school, commuting just about an hour away. Our youngest son is at Spurgeon College, which is here in Kansas City, as a sophomore. And our middle son, John, is married and graduating Boyce College in Louisville. We're actually traveling back next Wednesday to pick them up. They're going to move back, live in our basement for a while to reestablish here, because they don't have to, obviously they're not staying for graduation. And since there is no graduation, they can finish up online here. And he's going to be a student at Expositors next year, Todd. So
awesome.
He'll be seeing you in class. And we've been here for coming up on 9 years in Kansas City, and love our church, just blessed beyond measure, and really love being a part of training men in the seminary as well.
Yeah, it was a joy. I got to be at your church last May, about a year ago, for TES graduation, and that was the first time I got to actually see your church and interact with your church family, and just what a blessing your church is. So is your wife there? Is she going to?
Yeah, I don't know. Is my mic working? Yeah, here's Kim, my wife.
Hi, Kim.
Hi, Kim.
Hi.
This is Todd in his church.
And Julie.
And Julie.
Hi.
Great to see you, Kim. Thanks for letting us steal your husband for an hour.
Oh, sure. I get a lot of them these days. So
yes,
That's true.
probably glad to see me distracted, although most of my life is staring at a computer on Zoom calls.
Yeah, right. Great. Well, one of the things we wanted to even find out, Rick, is just how we're kind of talking about just how this quarantine thing is affecting people. And I know it's probably not all we want to talk about tonight, but just trying to think through as a church family how to best navigate this. We've been in this now for a month or so. What are some ways that this quarantine has affected you? How have you seen it just impact your daily life? Obviously, it's very different than what it was even 6 weeks ago, but just personally, how how have you seen the Lord impact, change, grow you, whatever, through this whole situation?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. We're kind of asking that of our church and our care groups with each other all the time. There's kind of the negative and the positive. The negative is we're shut down. I miss my church. I love Zoom, praise God for FaceTime and those kind of things, but I miss seeing our church. There was a sweet girl, kind of a special needs gal, who sent me a video through her dad. Her dad's our sound guy, and sent me a video just with her arms out in the air and said, I miss hugging you, Pastor Rick. And you love that, but then you wonder, when we regather, is it going to be appropriate just to run up and give a hug? It's going to be so different. So the negatives obviously is separation. I hate the term social distancing. We're physically distancing. We want to be socially engaged as much as we can. So that's the downside. The upside is I am wonderfully shocked at how easy it is to connect with people. This is going to sound strange, but in many ways, our church has become more connected in the past month than they were ever before. Just, one of the reasons is that everything that they were scheduled to do on the weeknights, whether it was sports or music or whatever, is canceled. Mm-hmm. So they're able to connect more. So we've actually seen a hidden blessing, silver lining, in that people are connecting more. I'm getting connected more. I've spent, I'm a little convicted as a pastor, Todd, because I've made more pastoral phone calls in the past month than I ever did before, and wonder, why didn't I do this more? So that's the blessing of it. Time alone, home to read, that book that's been sitting on your shelf for a long time that you bought intending to read, we can actually pull off the shelf now. And honestly, time alone with my family, time at home with my family. We have Luke and Mark and Kim here, and I like them. I mean, it's just good to be with them. The days are very full, and the nights you get to hang out and watch a show and talk and have dinner together. It's almost been a reset and a retreat for us. So there's the downside, but there's also unexpected blessings of the time that we've enjoyed.
Yeah. Related to that, you kind of touched on this on the one another's a little bit. How's your church doing the one another's? I'm asking the question for a few reasons. Number one, I just finished a 6 or 7 week series on the one another's, and it was providential. We started that series before this whole COVID-19 things happened. And, we are in the midst of the series when all this really blew up. And so I think the Lord just had us providentially working through the one another's. How do you see the church doing the one another's in the midst of this time, or maybe needing to step that up a little bit more in light of the term social distancing and our inability to meet together?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. The one another's are where we're leaning right now. It's being creative with them. The technology blessings that we have of even what we're doing right here. I mean, I'm seeing much of your church family right now, and we're able to do the same with our care groups. They're meeting regularly. So that's a huge way. One of the things that's been interesting for us, and I'm sure it has because you have a healthy church, Todd, we've had more people ask if they could find needs to meet and places to serve than we have had needs presented, which is a sweet blessing. So one example is there's a pile of grocery cards that at our house that we're trying to find places to give them to, and we don't have to work too hard by that. But it's just a blessing to see that. But the one another's are just, you have to be creative. And by technology, I mean, no one could have done this 10 years ago. When was the iPhone? Like 2007 or something? So a dozen years ago, this wasn't even, the idea of video conferencing through a phone or through a computer was so foreign. So we're blessed by that. We're seeing people be creative with notes, driveway meetings. I had a meeting with a friend who came by, and we sat in lawn chairs in my driveway for an hour and a half on Wednesday and just talked, or maybe it's Tuesday, whatever day it is. That's another thing. Every day feels like Groundhog Day to me. Every day is the same.
We said the same thing.
So I never know what day it is. The bottom line is, I'm sure everything you've taught, we want to apply those kind of things. You just have to be creative in this season. And we're also reminding each other, this is temporary. People keep calling this the new normal. I don't like that term because I don't want this to ever become normal. This is the temporary abnormal. What we're, and I don't know if you're going to talk about this, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Where we are now is starting to think about, what does re-entry into gathering again as a church body look like? That, for those of us who fly, and anything about flying, the most dangerous and most troubling parts are when you take off and when you land. And I feel like this thing is the same thing. It's shutting it down was all tough, but reigniting it is going to be interesting as well. So we've had hours and hours of meeting. We have 2 meetings tomorrow scheduled to talk about what regathering will look like. And we have to listen to our Prairie Village mayor, our governor, our county seat. Kansas City is bizarre because we have a mayor of Kansas City, Kansas City, Missouri, and 4 counties that come together with a state line in between. It's so confusing as to who really makes the rules on this. So.
Yeah, we've had numerous discussions as well, and we're waiting to hear from our governor tomorrow, even on what's going to what the next couple of weeks is going to look like. We've thrown out some options like we're going to have a couple services to accommodate people. We have potentially 3 parts of our building that we could divide people out into and social distance them, from each other and come in separate entrances. We've talked about even having some outdoor services, which in Michigan at this time is a little iffy. But these are all things that we're navigating. Are you guys leaning one way or the other, or is it too early to tell?
Yeah, we will. There's supposed to be a major press conference tomorrow with our governor because we've heard May 3rd, May 15th, June 1, everything's floating around. I think most, and don't hold me to this, but most likely what we're going to do is to we'll have 2 services. We'll split our congregation in half so we can put rows between and cluster in families. And we'll have a morning service and an evening service that are identical, which will give us a chance to at least disinfect and clean in between the services. We have a team who will come and do that. But we're not going to have any children's, any Sunday school, any nursery. But we're going to have, it's hard to describe, Todd, you've been there. We have a massive atrium in our church, and we have a monitor at one end. That's going to be our cry room. We actually are going to call it the wiggle room, because you're going to have toddlers in there and all sorts of, little crawling creatures that are going to be tough to sit in a service. So we'll probably shorten the service, first of all, just to accommodate the younger ones who are going to be in there. But we realized that for the first foreseeable weeks, maybe months, the idea of re-engaging nursery and children's is going to be a tough sell for parents to just drop their kids off, because those places are germ factories, as we all know. Anyway, add COVID and it even stirs it up anymore.
Yeah, that's good. We're waiting to make some final decisions here once we know a little bit more. One of the things I wanted to ask you was virtual communion. Have you done virtual communion? And if so, why? If not, why not? And I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
It's a good question. 2 weeks ago, we had a 2-hour, just hour and a half discussion with our elders about this. And we came to the conclusion that if another church did that, we were not going to judge them, but we really felt like we wanted to wait based on the 5 times it says in 1 Corinthians 11, when you gather together. So we really feel like that's a corporate expression of fellowship, proclaiming the Lord's death till he returns. And we're not comfortable, even the fencing of that, just to let families fence the table, and where we didn't know what was going on there. So we decided that we were not going to do it, but we were very clear to say if other churches were going to, that we were not going to write blogs and tell them that they're off.
Yeah.
What'd you guys decide?
Yeah, that's kind of where we're leaning as well. We have not done any communion virtually. We've had some discussions as an elder team. And like you said, I think we would not fault any other churches for doing it. There are some like-minded churches that have chosen to do virtual communion, and I wouldn't in any way castigate them for that. But for the very reason you mentioned, I think 1 Corinthians 11, those 5 verses, it's verse 17, 18, 20, 33, and 34. All 5 of those verses. I actually looked it up just recently, and so I remember those. But he says when you gather together, and the implication seems to be when the church is meeting physically present with one another. So that's why we are probably leaning away. I don't think we are going to do it at all. One question, though, here would just be kind of a devil's advocate on that issue. What would you say to the argument that would say, well, in the early church in Corinth, they had no other opportunity. So the obvious conclusion was they had to meet together physically, and would not a Zoom, something like this, constitute the church meeting together in some sense? I'm not advocating for that necessarily, but that would be an argument that would be offered against that.
No, and honestly, Todd, if this were to extend to a year, we may be asking those questions. But we think that because it's temporary, we're going to do it. Remember, the Huguenots, depending on whether you want to say the French or not, the Huguenots went to Calvin. They came to, during the Reformation, came to Geneva, and they were so excited to have communion because they hadn't had it in a year. Sometimes they were meeting in a forest, once a year to have the Lord's table. So the history of the church has proven that some have just said, no, we're going to wait till we do get together and get together. So there may be some extenuating circumstances if this thing went on forever, where, or for a year, where we might think of doing that. But even then, we said, if that were the case, we would get care groups together and have as much of a representation as we could, rather than having individual family units do that. The parallel would be if let's just say that you're wanting to be baptized, and you said, well, the church isn't getting together and the lake's frozen over, so I'm just going to sit in my warm bathtub, slip underwater, and that will work. Well, it just kind of undermines the meaning of the whole picture. And I think the picture of coming together is important. So I still think it's when you come together, and because it's in the script. Very interesting too. Paul makes this point. They could have, in a sense, have done that at home, because at the end of that passage, he says, you're coming and actually trying to get full. You're trying to eat at the Lord's table, not just celebrate, the memorial dimension of that. Which if you follow that line of thinking, he could have said, look, after your dinner, just have communion at home, because he was already talking about their eating at home. But he still says in line of that, when you gather together. So would we church discipline someone for doing that? Of course not. But we think it's just not the wisest expression. So we're going to wait till we're together.
Yeah, that's good. I think even the word communion has at its root the word community.
Yes.
And so even the word itself implies a physical presence of the body gathered together. So one of the things that we've tried to emphasize over the course of the last couple of weeks or month or so is that what we're doing right now, this is not church.
No.
Like nothing about this, the Zoom calls, the live stream, the Facebook live sessions, none of this is church. And I almost even want to move away from the term church. I read an article by Tim Challies, and they said that they're calling their online services just chapel services, and we're not doing that. But I get what he's doing is he doesn't want to communicate that this virtual online thing that we're doing is a counterpart or equivalent to what we do in the corporate gathering.
That's and I agree with that. I appreciate what Tim is saying, but I think there's an intuition. If I were to interview all the folks on this Zoom call, or any of our folks, everyone kind of knows this is not church. If we call it chapel, if we call it a teaching time, whatever, it doesn't change the fact that no one is sitting in their pajamas with their coffee watching me preach in a suit thinking this is church. So there is a fundamental difference that I think that everyone just kind of instinctively knows, because it's so different. But there's a guy in town here, a good friend of mine, who's been pretty vocal about not meeting, and he says, you shouldn't do this. Even though at the end of his blog, he said, here's some good places you could live stream if you want to. Why they're not live streaming? We're not live streaming to extend our church services. We're live streaming because one of the pastoral functions of the elders and pastors is to feed the sheep, and we can feed the sheep virtually. That is it's different, but there is a way to feed. Someone else said, one of my favorite lines of this whole time said, preaching to the camera is like kissing your wife through a window. She's there, but it's not the same. It's really true. So
Yeah.
Good. I like that. Just kind of still more on the body life. I'm trying to just ferret out a little bit of the body life here with some of these questions about the one another's and communion and that kind of thing. What would you say to the person who's isolated, they're the extrovert, and they're just dying on the vine? They are missing the body so bad, and it's just killing them to not be able to hug people and handshakes and be around the body. And how do you shepherd and care for that person?
Well, since you're describing me, why don't you tell me how you can help me?
Okay, so I didn't want to make it that obvious, Rick, but okay, let's use you as an example.
No, listen, all of us are having to limit and to self-adjust on these. Let me talk about the same coin, the other side. We do have folks in our church who love the isolation. This is joy for them. They don't have to interact. They're an introvert, and this takes the stress of saying hi to people they don't know on Sundays away. And so there's the other side too. And this becomes a part of us shepherding each other, and not just the pastors and elders and leaders, but this is the body shepherding each other, no matter which end of the spectrum you fall on of extrovert, introvert. We can engage. I mean, by God's grace, we live in a day when we can do this. We can make a phone call. And so the people who are really excited, Kim and I are the exact opposite on this. She recharges by downtime. I recharge around people. But it's one of the reasons I think God put us together is we just kind of pull each other in the middle of that. And so, I'm literally bouncing off the wall. She's told me several times in this last week, you need to go on a walk. And then I end up talking to strange neighbors, and they run from me because I'm using my voice. Anyway, it just comes back down to being honest with each other about our inclinations and how we can shepherd those in a temporary fashion. We keep remembering that this is temporary. One of the things that concerns me about this on the other side, Todd, is that this could easily start. We can treat people when we come out of this like they're contagions instead of souls. When I go to the grocery store and people are against pushing. You've gone too far. Our grocery store has directions in the aisle which way you can go, and I went the wrong way, and I thought I was going to get pushed over the cliff. It was so bad. So people are not contagions; they're souls, and hopefully we'll get back to the normal on that. But it's hard for those people who love fellowship and extroversion and to not engage and handshake. And when my friend came over to spend time in my driveway with me the other day, we both kind of went. It was weird. It was so awkward. So,
the elbow. You got to use the elbow.
Elbows. Yeah. It's going to be interesting to see how this goes back. So I don't think I answered your question. We just need to be honest with each other on our inclinations and see how sanctification can move us toward fighting those introversions or extroversions.
Yeah, that's good. Very good. Let me turn gears just a little bit, shift gears a little bit to the issue of the government. And I remember talking to you, we just came through Romans here in our church. We ended that series about 2-3 months ago. and just very, very profitable. Just love the book. It was incredible. 4.5 years in Romans. I know you preached through it a couple of years ago, and I remember at one point talking to you within the last year or so, you said something about when you got to Romans 13, everything was going good, not a lot of questions, not a lot of issues, and then you got to Romans 13, and you had all kinds of questions about government and when do we submit and how far do we submit and those kinds of things. And then we're hearing some of this in Michigan now. You probably heard just a little bit about the governor here and the clampdowns, and you can you can go to the store and buy food, but you can't buy gasoline for your fishing boat, and you can't buy paint and lumber and those kinds of things. And so here's the question that we're starting to wrestle with, even tomorrow with another announcement coming from our governor. I'm imagining if she extends it again, which it sounds like she's going to do the stay-at-home order at least. We've had people already protesting in Lansing. And so as a believer, how do we navigate this? How do we deal with Romans 13? We're not at this point being asked to necessarily violate Scripture, but we're questioning the validity, even the science behind some of these orders, which seem to be almost so random that we can't even follow. So help us understand a little bit how we approach the government in a time like this.
Yeah, well, we're all asking those same questions, Todd, especially in Kansas City when you have a state line in the middle of our city and you have 4 counties and you have mayors, and it's just really confusing. And you have a president who's having a press conference every day. So it begins to get really confusing. Here's the thing we've tried to help our people see. First of all, what Todd is saying is right. I preached through Romans 9, 10, and 11 on the sovereignty of God and salvation, election, predestination, and it was crickets. No one said a word. When I preached Romans 13, 1-7 on obey the government, man alive, I found out I had an email address. And what we have to remember is that Paul is writing there. He's pre-Nero, right at the end of Tiberius's reign. So he's talking about a dictator, emperor who claims to be God and asks to be worshipped. And he's saying the government is there, but Romans 13:4 is the critical verse. It's for good. Now, if the government were telling your church and my church, you cannot meet because you're Christians, I'm sorry, guys, let's get ready. Let's get a sandwich. We're all going to jail. That's not why they're telling us not to meet. They're asking us not to meet for good. It's right out of Romans 13:4. So we also understand that we have a testimony. Let me extend your question into what you went talking about with Lansing, because we just in Topeka we had the same kind of protesters, and so I had a guy asking me yesterday, I think it was, what about our First Amendment in our Constitution gives us the right to protest if we don't like what the government says. So can't we exercise our rights and do that? And the answer I gave him, and I've thought about it more, I wish I could have, had been more prepared. Number one, because the government gives us a right to protest, doesn't mean it's a mandate or doesn't mean it's a good witness. In the same way that just as the Constitution gives me a right to bear arms, no one has to own a gun. If you take that logic to its extreme, think about this. When you get to the 14th Amendment, the government gives us the right, wrongly so, to abortions. So does that become a mandate? Of course not. So then there's other principles besides the rights in the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. Then it becomes, what's the best way to have a testimony? And I just told this friend, I said, if you want to go to Topeka because you can, that's one thing, and protest. But do you want to be on the evening news with you protesting, or would you rather be on your neighbor's doorstep telling them the gospel? What do you want your signature of your life to be? So it just kind of puts things in a different perspective. This is going to be temporary. None of us like that. We wish we could start back tomorrow. But I think our testimony to the community, people walking by, driving by our churches to see parking lots full, if that's in defiance, I think that makes a difference. And we want to err on the side of being good public citizens because we think that will long-term serve our testimony best in our community.
That's good. That's spot on. Yeah, I would wholeheartedly agree. And I think there's something in us that's American that says, but this isn't right. And we want to stand up and we want to exercise those rights. There's something about that independent American spirit that's just crying foul here. And I think we have to be very careful about that, because our reactions need to be tempered with Scripture, not the Constitution, although I'm a firm believer in the Constitution, and I served in our military wanting to defend that Constitution. But we have a higher order that we submit to than the Constitution. So that's very helpful, Rick. Just a couple here more, and then I'll see if our church would like to ask you anything. How have you seen this crisis perhaps expose some idols, just in America in general, in the church in general in America, evangelicalism, your church, your own heart? How's that for just being completely broad? But how might this crisis be exposing idols in our heart?
Look, I think it's exposed an idol in all of our hearts for safety and medicine. You know, we break an arm, we go get it fixed. We have a bacteria, we go get an antibiotic. We're so used to that. You know, you've been to Malawi. Sometimes if those people break their arm, they die. They die of infection. There's just, I think we've been lulled to sleep into thinking how safe we are. And we need to be reminded how fragile life is. So I think God is crushing our idols of medicine, and praise God for medicine. I mean, I'm so thankful for hospitals and for doctors and for nurses. But we have to remember that Psalm 139 is pretty humbling. God knows every single one of our days. He has them marked out. We are not going to die one day sooner or one day beyond what he has ordained. And that's in his hands. So I think one of the idols is security and safety, that we've all lived under a big illusion. Think about this. We could have something next year or the year after that's twice as bad as this. I mean, this is a wake-up call, but this may not be it. Medicine doesn't fix everything, and that's kind of an idol, I think, in our heart. I think also the idol of security and finances. I mean, when this thing first went down, we had a hard talk with our staff and said, okay, people are going to lose jobs. They're going to not be able to give to the church. So we're going to have to find extra jobs. None of us were going to resign as pastors. We were just going to work at Home Depot or Starbucks or whoever would have us so that we could relieve some burden on our church. We were, man, I just saw that was a gut punch to me. I haven't thought about, my finances being secure for 40 years. So that was telling. Man, I could go on unpacking my own heart. Those are the two big cultural things that I think that stand out for all of us.
Yeah, that's very good. And we actually did a little Facebook Live today, our 3 pastoral staff, on that whole issue of idols and even comfort worship. We're creatures who love our comforts, our movies, our going out for dinners, whatever other comforts. And some of those are getting stepped on right now. And so it's exposing even some of those idols. So that's very good. Thank you. One last question, and then we'll open it up to our church here for just a few minutes. The issue of what is God doing in the midst of all of this? Obviously, it is hard and really impossible at this point to get into the mind of God and completely say this is what God is doing. But is there any way that at this point in the midst of this crisis we could say God seems to be doing this? And maybe it's a whole host of things, probably more than we could even enumerate. But I don't know if you could think of 2 or 3 or 4 things beyond what we've already talked about tonight. Some things that God is doing either in the church or, is this a judgment from God? Some people have talked about this being a judgment on America because of abortion and those kinds of things. We can't always make the 1-for-1 correlation between God is judging America because we abort babies. I'm not sure we can go that far, but any thoughts on just what is God doing in the midst of this?
Yeah, I've thought a lot about that, had a lot of conversations. Let me say something that might feel shocking, but let me explain. Of course, this is the judgment of God, because the wages of sin is death. All death is the judgment of God. But the fact that we're right here having this, we're experiencing grace. You know, in him we live and move and have our existence, Paul told the Athenians. So yes, all death, all sickness is the judgment of God because of sin. Let's not sugarcoat it and make it a Christian platitude. This is not the judgment of God on sinners, I think, because of national stance on abortion or gay marriage or whatever. All sinners die because we're sinners. That is the judgment of God. Whatever happened to those poor souls that died of coronavirus was going to happen to them eventually, if not the coronavirus or the COVID-19. But the fact that because not all unbelievers, not everyone who wrote an abortion bill are dying from this. We have to be careful that we're saying that. I think God is doing way more intricate things than that. So yes, this is the judgment of God in one sense, but yes, we're all, because we don't have it, enjoying the grace of God. So I think there's both demonstrations that we have to be reminded of. But we have an advantage. You know, in Romans 5, verse 3, 4, 5 right there, he says, exult, rejoice. We rejoice in our tribulations, knowing that God is doing something in our suffering and our tribulation. The Christian has the advantage of knowing that God's doing something. James 1, consider all joy, my brethren, when you encounter various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance. We have an advantage. Think about this. We have an advantage that Abraham and Job never had. You know, Genesis 22:1 says God tested Abraham, and then he sends him up to execute Isaac. But he never told him he was testing him. In Job, there's this conversation with Job and with God and Satan in heaven, and then Job suffers. Job never heard that conversation. We have the advantage of knowing what God's doing, and that he's doing something, and that he's good, and we can't be suspicious of his character. So I think we have a huge advantage as believers, knowing that this is reminding us that this world is not our own. It's just scaffolding for the real building. And just to remember that. So a long answer to say, yes, all death is the judgment of God, but all life is the grace of God. And we need to remember both.
That's good. I just preached last night on Luke 13 and the Tower of Siloam. And, you know, I mean, that's a great text to just go to what you're just saying, that, I mean, those people died in that calamity and that catastrophe, but Jesus says, and unless you repent, the same will happen to you. Yeah, likewise. So, very good. Well, church family, want to just give you just a few minutes to see if you have any questions for Dr. Holland.
Yeah, and just Rick, your friend Rick. That's all I want to be.
Yeah. Okay, that works too. Rick, any questions
you're Dr.
for
Dykstra? Does Todd make you call him Dr. Dykstra? Yeah, that's good.
No, I don't. I plead with them not to. So it's good. Church family, any questions you want to just pose to our dear beloved friend Rick here? And this is your time to ask him any key questions. So feel free, unmute your mic, and we'll give you 10 minutes or so to do this. 15 minutes maybe.
I have a quick question.
Rick.
Do you have any funny stories about Todd that you could tell us?
Okay, we're going to just remove Joe from this call.
Mute that boy.
Oh, goodness. Julie can help me here. What
I don't know.
He's a very wry sense of humor. Todd is so godly and so believable that you can play a game that involves lying and Todd wins every time because no one would believe he would lie. You know, he's just that kind of sincerity. But let me think about that. But he actually flew under the radar with having very many, standout stories. So pretty good.
Good. I'm glad I kept all those things under wraps and you never found out. So that's good to know.
Rick, I just want to say thank you for all your teaching over the years. I've listened to a number of your sermons from at Mission Road there, and then also back at Grace. So I want to thank you for that. And that's really been a blessing. The Lord's used that. But I have a question. We've been concentrating on what's happening in the United States, and I was just wondering, your missionaries that are overseas or in places, how are they doing, and how things happening, and how's the church supporting them if they...
Yeah, good question. Thank you for that question. I love your heart that would even care about that question. We've been staying in regular contact with our missionaries. Again, technology is a wonderful thing. I talked to Massimo Mollica, who's one of our missionaries in Genova, Italy, who's, we're talking about lockdown. We can go for walks and take our dogs out. And he's literally been in an apartment, except for going to the grocery store, for 6 weeks with his, and I think it's 750 square feet with 4 kids, and they are literally locked down. So they're doing well, but under different circumstances. Also have a friend in Italy, Dave Standridge, whose father was in Milan and died 2 weeks ago of the coronavirus. And in talking to Dave, what was heartbreaking is he couldn't go see his dad. That they had a phone call, and then he died 2 days later because, it was so infectious there. So, those are tough issues. Now, there's a real sense when that could happen here in the States with someone as well. Also, our missionary is just now coming to Malawi, Todd, as you know. And if it gets a foothold there, they have no medical system. So it would be devastating to there. It's already, showing up with a vengeance in South Africa. We've been talking to them also in Japan. So yes, talking to missionaries. Here's the thing though. Every Zoom call that I've had with those guys to try to give them encouragement, without question, 100%, I've left the call more encouraged than any encouragement I left with those guys. They are rock stars spiritually. They are just knocking it out and taking advantage of it evangelistically and shepherding their people and caring for their apartment building. And it's and calling to care for them, I'm the one who ends up being cared for.
Good question, Michael.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Nobody?
I guess I got Go ahead, Milton.
Go ahead, Michael.
Okay. Follow-up question just was, how can we pray for you and your church and your elders?
Well, I love that question, and it's the same answer I would give people who've been asking me that all week, and I would ask you to pray for your leadership on this too, and it's wisdom. All of our church leaders right now, your church, our church, we are making decisions that have so many variables that are literally changing every day, every week. That it's almost like, parenting kids in different rooms with different principles, and everything's different. It's just, so pray for wisdom for your church leaders, for us to make decisions on what regathering is going to look like. Also, how to extend care right now. We have a lady in our church, sweet lady. She's in her late 70s. She's got serious congestive heart failure. She's on hospice. She's on the front porch of heaven, and she lives in an apartment building that is, if I go see her, there's a threat to me. If I bring something in, it'll kill her in 24 hours. So we've been talking on the phone. Then finally, I guess it was 2 days ago, she just asked me, and she said, will you and Kim just come and see me? Mm-hmm. So we did. We put on our masks and we went inside. We took them off and spent an hour with her and talked and laughed and shared stories and prayed. So just praying for wisdom. We don't always know what to do or how to do it. And we've never done this before. So my main prayer is just wisdom in how to give leadership and make spiritual decisions. Thank you.
We've joked a little bit as a staff that we don't remember the class in seminary on how to minister during pandemics.
I missed that class.
I did too. We're going to add that to the TES curriculum. Yeah. Stafford, did you have a question? Were you going to say something?
Yes. Hi, Rick. My family actually attended Mission Road quite a few years back. I was only 3 at the time, and we stayed for a good 5 years, and that was our home church for about quite a few years when my family lived in Kansas. But I was basically we haven't been in touch with the guys up there. We've kind of fallen out of touch after a while. I was very young at the time, and I was just wondering if you could give an update on how the church has been doing, pandemic aside, if you've seen lots of growth, and just how things have been down in Kansas.
Yeah, we're growing. I think in depth and in breadth. We're about 500 and change right now. We've extended the sanctuary where you remember there was a little narthex that we blew the back wall out and gained about 100 seats. Well, I think it's healthy. I mean, we have issues just like every church, and we will until Jesus comes. But I think it's healthy. People are caring for each other. There's a culture of discipleship. They love the word. They love their leadership. They love each other. The main thing I would say that determines the health of our church, to give you a report on our church, is that the leadership love each other, are strongly loyal to each other, and we have zero fissures or divisions in our leadership.
Very nice.
Which is everything, because if your leadership of the team is united, you can weather any storm. But if there are fissures or cracks in that leadership team, any storm can create a havoc in your church. So it's good.
Right.
All right.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Stafford.
I was going to say, I was actually pleasantly surprised when Maranatha joined the TES group that Mission Road was among the roster. I'm like, hey, I know those guys.
Ah, good.
Old friends. So, yeah.
Great.
It's great. All right, last chance. Any other questions for Rick?
I'll ask a question, always.
Go ahead, Lauren.
Hi, I'm Lauren. I was just wondering, how would you, when you're talking with people who are really struggling with just being isolated and struggling with all that, I feel like sometimes people in well-meaning tend to instead just kind of enter in that with someone else, with whoever's talking to them, that they'll just kind of compare it and say, well, it could be worse. It could be the Holocaust, or it could be, and it can always be worse. And so not just in this situation, but just in general, when people are hurting or suffering, what would kind of be, where do you kind of come from as opposed to just kind of giving those kind of answers of it could be worse, because that never helps anybody. So just wondering your thoughts on that.
Well, I think, first of all, taking your counsel and not saying that, because there's always a worse trial than the one I'm going through, but it doesn't feel like the one I'm going through because I'm going through this one. So, I've learned so much about biblical counseling from Job and the mistakes that his friends made. And I think we give his friends a bad rap. They were trying to help Job by saying, maybe you did this wrong, maybe this. They were throwing everything they could against the wall to see what would stick, because they wanted to help their friend. But they were probably most helpful that first week when they just sat with him. Let me give you a convicting story in my own heart with my wife, about my wife and me. We were married just a few months. We were in Detroit. We lived in Detroit. And she had a situation at work where there was something going on with some of the gals, or one of the bosses or something. So she explains this situation. And so I instantly said, boom, 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 this is how you solve it, this is what you should do, what you should say to whoever, whatever. And she just said, I'll never forget this. She says, sometimes I don't want you to solve my problem. I just want you to care that I have one. And I think that's a missing salve in Christian fellowship. We don't have to fix things. We just have to bear the burden, Galatians 6 says. bear the burden of someone who's going through something. So I think if you have a friend who's going through something like that, just care. It's okay to say, you know what, I can't fix this, but I sure love you. I have nothing to contribute except my care for you. So, good question.
Very helpful.
Very, very sweet question.
All right. Well, I think we're going to wrap this up. Rick, thank you so much. I know you're a busy man. I know you're caring for your own church and shepherding your own people. So it just means a lot to our church family that you'd be willing to give us an hour of your time. So, brother, thank you so much.
You're so kind. I love Todd and Julie Dykstra like they were flesh and blood. These are some of my favorite people. You are so blessed to have this couple with you. So love you guys. And thanks for letting me hear and learn from you guys tonight. Thank you.
Absolutely. Rick, I think we'll just let you leave the meeting.